Has something taken place? At last, the phone connected. I told my spouse about it right away. Someone appears to have broken in. Although your room is okay, there is a mess in the room, and there may have been some theft. Right now, I'm phoning the cops. Wait a moment. In fact, my spouse was hesitant to say something unexpected. I had let my mother stay in the room during our trip. What does that mean? Karen is my name. I work for a corporation and am 29 years old. I got married a year ago and have been working non-stop since I graduated from college. Sam, a business associate from a collaborative organization, is my partner. As the new project manager at his firm, I went to a meeting where I first met Sam. He smiled nervously as he greeted me. It's good to meet you. My name is Sam. I'm excited to collaborate with you today. We eventually got to know one another better after a few of meetings. Karen, do you have some time now? Sam inquired one day following a meeting. Would you want tea at one of the cafes I suggest? It sounds pleasant. I would really like to go, I said. I found myself opening up to him during our talk at the cafe because I was pulled to his honesty and sense of humor. To be completely honest, Karen, I've been yearning to learn more about you lately. This weekend, how about we have supper together? My heart was bursting with delight and amazement when Sam shouted those words. Yes, I'd be delighted to come. We started going on more dates after that. Sam listened to me carefully and was always kind. Half a year later, one evening after supper, Sam unexpectedly declared his love for Karen, stating, "To be honest, I've been thinking about you all the time. Would you accompany me out?" Sam, I also adore you. I'm excited about our future together. Our love relationship started right away. Sam repeatedly proposed to Karen as we dated, saying, "Let's live together. Let's tie the knot." I was first hesitant because I felt it was a little early, but Sam's intense affection and desire to live with me drew me in. "Sam, I also want to build a future with you," I said one day. "Let's tie the knot." He was ecstatic, and our new family life started then. Sharing meals, watching TV, and having chats at home made me quite happy after living alone for a long period. I am therefore quite happy with my married life with Sam. But my mother-in-law is the one thing I've been worried about since getting married. She is still in her 40s and gave birth to Sam at a fairly young age. She is quite close to Sam, who was raised by his single mother, and they frequently go shopping together at her suggestion. Perhaps as a result, my mother-in-law often meddles in our marriage life and finds it difficult to let go of Sam. My mother-in-law entered the picture while we were selecting a dining table for our new apartment. "How about this table, Karen?" "I believe it's fantastic." I paused before answering, "Yes, but it might be a bit too big." However, my mother-in-law persisted. "No, having a table this size will make family meals much more comfortable, right, Sam?" She asked Sam whether he agreed. "Yeah, maybe a larger one would be better," added Sam. After making a decision, my mother-in-law said, "Then it's settled." In addition, she frequently showed up to our house without warning to cook since, for whatever reason, he had given her an extra key. My mother-in-law was in the kitchen one day preparing clam chowder when I got home. "Welcome home, Karen." She smiled and added, "Today, I'm going to make clam chowder." When I remarked meekly, "Mom, it's a bit troublesome when you come over without notice," she smiled and said, "Don't be so formal. Since we are family, visiting at any time shouldn't be an issue, right?" In addition, I was frequently requested to prepare meals for my mother-in-law. "Karen, next weekend, please come to my house with Sam and prepare the meal." "Well, but you cook really well? Why am I required to do this?" That isn't the case. Young people should seize the chance to put in a lot of effort. Sam is eagerly anticipating it. "Yes, Karen, your food is usually great." "I'm excited about it," Sam said tremblingly. Additionally, my mother-in-law's meddling persisted, steadily raising my stress levels. She was not only meddling, but she also openly expressed her disapproval of me by frequently using harsh language. For instance, she unexpectedly came up at our house recently while we were celebrating Sam's birthday. She said, "Happy birthday!" "Oh, Mom!" "Oh, is Karen also present? Did you have today off?" "I took a day off to celebrate Sam's birthday." That is an error. For his birthday, Sam and I intended to have a lavish party for just the two of us. Our plans are ruined by your presence. I wish you had done a better job of reading the room. Even so, I am married to Sam. What if you are his spouse? You don't think you're superior than a mother, do you? Don't get ahead of yourself since your relationship is only a piece of paper. I am the one who gave birth to Sam, and we are related by blood. As a result, she despises our marriage and places more importance on the parent-child bond. Because she loves her son so much and is frequently aloof toward me, she does not prefer me. Nevertheless, I persuaded myself to put up with this without feeling envious. She should be respected for raising her son by herself. But something happened that I couldn't forgive. Last week, it took place. An antique watch that belonged to my late grandpa sat in the living room. My grandfather gave me the oldest watch when he became ill and had to stop his watch shop. According to my grandfather's will, this antique, which is valued at over $20,000, should be utilized in difficult financial circumstances. This watch became a very significant inheritance to me after my grandfather passed away. I keep this old watch in the living room so I can always feel connected to my grandfather, who I adore. But my mother-in-law spotted this watch and condemned it when she came to visit. "What is this? Why do you keep such a shabby, outdated watch in the living room as though it were valuable?" She didn't seem to grasp when I really attempted to explain that the watch was a priceless antique and a keepsake from my grandpa. It hurt me so much to see her glaring down at the memento. It seemed like my dead grandfather and I were being hated. I decided to carefully conceal the watch in a drawer in my room if being derided by her meant defending it. "What happened to that worn-out watch?" she later inquired, laughing. She appeared happy that things had gone her way when I responded that it was kept in my room, which made me even more upset. Naturally, Sam reassured me and asked, "Are you okay?" when she left. I told him that I was unhappy with his mother and that I was experiencing anguish. Every time he hears me, he says, "My mother does it because she loves me." I'm sorry. His support against his mother is what I'm looking for, not an apology. In spite of this, he respects me and his mother, who reared him alone, and he can relate to his conflict between his mother and wife. I couldn't hold him responsible. Consequently, I was forced to put up with it for his benefit. He abruptly organized a week-long vacation one day. His considerateness in reducing the stress with my mother-in-law made me feel lighter. We immediately took a holiday and went on a little family outing. I had a great time at the destination, spending time with my spouse alone and not worrying about my mother-in-law at all. It was definitely a joyful week. Time passed quickly, and the day to go back home finally came. I went home by myself because Sam had to go to his workplace first. I opened the door to our home as I made my way back, remembering the good times of the journey. Even though the apartment was familiar, I sensed something was wrong as soon as I entered the living room. What could it be? I pondered. I felt uneasy as I moved about the living room. Wait a minute. When we departed, I recalled firmly shutting the drapes and windows, but now I saw that the window lock was undone and the drapes were slightly open. The TV remote, which is typically kept in its case, was neatly lined up on the table, but the sofa cushions were arranged carelessly. The room appeared to have been somewhat rearranged. As someone who painstakingly maintains order, these minor inconsistencies caused me great discomfort, even though the space was spotless. When I proceeded to the kitchen, I saw that the refrigerator was missing some food and that the sink had watermarks, which were obvious signs of recent use. What does this mean? There were no additional indications visible as I glanced at the entryway. Although I had a suspicion that my mother-in-law, who has an extra key, may have broken in while we were away, it didn't seem plausible. Furthermore, we couldn't have left the window open at that moment. My mother-in-law, I thought, had some sense of appropriateness. Then it occurred to me that it may have been a burglar. But I firmly rejected the idea since I didn't want to consider that option. There would be greater mayhem if it were a burglar. This must be a miscommunication because everything inside is undamaged. Before we went, Sam most likely tampered with something. My attempts to reach my spouse were unsuccessful, despite my best efforts to persuade myself, and my fear only increased. What should I do if, by chance, someone did enter? I was startled by what I saw as I silently felt uneasy as I opened the door to my room. My room had been utterly looted. Underwear was strewn on the floor, and clothes that ought to have been placed neatly were thrown carelessly on the bed. The dresser's drawers were stuffed full of rumpled clothing. The condition of my desk was the most startling thing. The contents were scattered everywhere, and each drawer had been flipped upside down. I quickly looked in the other rooms, but just Mai's was impacted. Why only this room? Nothing of great worth is present here. The watch I received from my grandpa sprung to me as I considered it. Not at all. Why has it disappeared? I dug through the desk and looked everywhere, but I couldn't find the watch. I was certain then that the watch had been targeted. I became agitated and frantically attempted to get in touch with my husband once again, even though I had my doubts about why such an ancient watch needed to be taken. Did something happen? The call connected this time. I gave my spouse a brief explanation of the circumstances. Someone appears to have broken in. Although your room is okay, there's a mess in the room, and there may have been some theft. Right now, I'm phoning the cops. Really? Yes, there is some food gone from the refrigerator as well. It's possible that someone infiltrated. Hold on a second. Before I contact the police, I would like to investigate it myself. I'll be right back. Check to see if anything else is missing in the interim. But I'm impatient. It's urgent. Additionally, several of my belongings are gone. In fact, my husband's tone was disturbed and he said something unexpected. I had let my mother stay in the room during our trip. What does that mean? Our apartment is close to the station and has good access to downtown, so my mother asked me if she could stay here to keep it safe. But why would you decide something so crucial on your own? I was completely uninformed. I'm not fond of her. Therefore, I was upset with Sam for allowing her to use our place without any thought. But instead of addressing my ire, he instead made an effort to convince me. You don't have to be that angry. This is how it has always been. As she pleases, my mother comes and departs. Just bear it like you always have. That isn't a joke. This is unforgivable. The room was ravaged by my mother-in-law. To merely put up with it is ridiculous. Then, out of nowhere, a voice said, "Karen, why are you so upset? Are you now speaking with Sam, Mom? Why do you talk to my son in such manner? I'm angry because he decided on his own to lend out the room to you during our trip. You dare! Saying you despise my presence is equivalent to blaming Sam. Indeed, I do not wish for you to freely come and go in our house. What? Karen, you truly are a coward. Don't speak that way. You behave like a victim and point the finger at my mother without any justification. However, it's all in your head. It wasn't obvious why I was being held responsible when it was obvious that I had truly been harmed and that my mother-in-law had used the room. Furthermore, it was unexpected that Sam would stand up for his mother in this circumstance. He eventually came home in a rage and sided with her, accusing me. Karen, such charges are unacceptable to me. This cannot be forgiven. To show my mother-in-law and husband the problem, I dragged them to my room. His astonishment at the mess was evident, but she didn't seem surprised, as though she knew previously, and she was soon exposed as the guilty party. Please be honest, Mom. Have you robbed this room? Even if it was messy, exaggerating about it is a bit much. All I did was forget to tidy up. There shouldn't be any issues if I tidy up now, right? In any case, I was planning to do it later. It's overly sensitive of you. Despite acknowledging her transgression, she displayed no sorrow. When Sam realized she was the one responsible, he felt uncomfortable and said nothing, staring down. She started to defend herself. I left my clothes at home, so I borrowed Karen's. Since our heights aren't too dissimilar, I figured we could borrow a little. It seems irrational to be upset about this since we are family, don't you think? You're overly sensitive. Then he began to concur with her. I believe so. Just because something is missing doesn't mean you have to blame my mother for everything. It's common for family members to borrow items, and it's odd to not be able to overlook a small mess. I wanted her to also apologize to me, and I had hoped that he would. The truth, however, was the reverse. Even though it was obvious that she was the one who had robbed my room, he requested me to apologize to her for my allegedly offensive remarks and arrogant demeanor. My love for him quickly waned after witnessing his ardent support for her. I started to feel more and more empty. I had put up with it, thinking my husband loved me as much as he loved his mother, but it wasn't like that. He vehemently blamed me and obviously favored his mother in order to escape criticism of himself, which made me feel abandoned. I was devastated at the time and decided to exact revenge on my mother-in-law. Holding back and showing consideration for Sam is no longer necessary. I can't let this go. I had planned my answer before he came back. Mother-in-law, let me ask you clearly, where did you take my watch? I'm not aware of any watches. What makes that ancient object appealing to me? She was unable to conceal her anger when responding. Regardless of my husband's opinion, I had made up my mind not to forgive her, even if I was positive she had stolen it. I pushed her more. However, you acknowledge that you created a mess in this room, don't you, mother-in-law? Some items that ought to be here are missing. You have to be aware of that. Hey, don't suspect my mother. Is it worth getting so worked up about a watch if she claims it's not her? Let's move on from this topic, and I'll get you a new watch if you truly want one that badly. Please don't meddle. That watch is my grandfather's lone heirloom and is priceless. Until I get it back, I won't give up. I have repeatedly said that I have not stolen anything. You're making much too much noise. Being boisterous is okay. We have to assume that someone broke in if you really didn't take it. If so, I have to notify the police right away since this is now a police case. We will be able to swiftly identify the offender with the use of fingerprinting and other investigations. I took my cell phone and left the room after saying this. My mother-in-law quickly attempted to stop me at that point. Please wait. The cops don't need to be called. I must admit that I borrowed it a bit. All right, I'll give it back in a week. You said you had no knowledge of it only a moment ago. Also, please refrain from using the word borrowed. Stealing is the same as taking something without authorization. You simply acknowledge that you stole it. The watch is missing. I need it back right away since it's so vital to me. I'm impatient for a week. She started to perspire heavily as I made my claim. It's impossible. Why is that? Because I've already sold it to a pawn shop. What? Really? The asking price is $20,000? Is it not unbelievable? It wasn't worth that much, in my opinion. Stop making jokes. Can you give the $20,000 back right away? After that, I want to pick it up personally by going to the pawn store. I apologize, but that isn't feasible. I've spent nearly all of that money and have very little left. Therefore, please don't hold me to any higher standards. You will need to raise the money on your own. After observing her derisive and impolite behavior, I concluded that there was no need in continuing the conversation and made the decision to end it. I understand. Unfortunately, this was your final opportunity. I called the cops as I was saying this. I am the one who made the earlier call. Regretfully, there has been theft, and the culprit is present. Please arrive right away. Who did you just call? Sam and his mother quickly came up to me after the conversation. I gave a thorough explanation of the circumstances. As soon as I spoke with Sam, I called the police to report our predicament. They advised me to investigate first, and then give them another call if there was a real problem. It's evident from our conversation that you took my watch. Therefore, I've reported it to the police. You sold it without authorization, which is against the law, in addition to stealing it. It is also illegal to utilize the money for personal expenses. What are you discussing? Instead of expressing gratitude, you contact the police after I generously turned that unneeded item into cash for you. I am astonished. Isn't this a little excessive, Karen? My mom is also a member of your family. Relatives? Someone who steals my stuff and doesn't care about it isn't someone I can call family. She is a criminal. A criminal? No, I haven't done anything despite saying it several times. Really? This entire discussion has been taped, and I want to provide the police with it as proof. The cops are not to be taken lightly. It will quickly become evident that you are the guilty party once they examine the fingerprints and the pawn shop's CCTV video. You will only get worse off if you keep it a secret. My husband and mother-in-law both expressed their rage as I grinned icily. This is absurd. Has it gotten to this point only because I borrowed it? Are you serious? I won't think twice about getting a divorce if you do this. Do you want it that way? If we get divorced, you'll be in danger too. The term divorce is supposed to force me to cooperate. I replied calmly to my husband's arrogance. I'm not bothered at all. The fact that your mother is a criminal is more troublesome. I was ready for a divorce from the start. Please wait. It was only a slip of the tongue, a jest about the divorce. I became very sentimental. Please give the divorce another chance. Please ignore what my mother did, and I'll apologize as many times as necessary. My husband's eyes filled with tears as he spoke. Paradoxically, his mother should have apologized, but instead she just stood there and stared at me with her arms crossed. Your justifications are ineffective. You consistently disregard my sentiments and keep defending her, even though I have already forgiven you and her several times. I won't pardon any of you this time. My mother-in-law was furious, and my spouse was unable to respond because of my hard position. Actually, your mother had already harmed me several times before to this watch event. The $500 I had left at home after my paycheck vanished. I was aware that she had been present, but I was unable to speak up without proof. But ever since I found out she was the one responsible, I had been purposefully putting fake money there. Were you aware of that? Calmly, I explained. What ought I to do? What ought I to do? She was perspiring and in a panic. I told the cops what was going on when the police showed up. Sam and his mother attempted to argue by saying things such, "This is just a family matter," or, "My wife is exaggerating the situation," but the police arrested her on suspicion of stealing after examining the scene and the discussion that was recorded. Along with another cop, Sam took her to the police station. My mother-in-law had told me about the pawn store, so I went there. There was security footage at the pawn store, and there was proof that my mother-in-law had sold the watch. Luckily, my grandfather's watch was still there and hadn't been sold yet. I was able to get my grandfather's watch because of the officer's explanation. Although it was challenging to address my mother-in-law and husband so directly, I think that calling the police was the proper move. I had the impression that my grandfather was complimenting me as soon as I held the watch. After that, My spouse and I finished the divorce process. My husband implored me to rescue his mother and to keep the divorce from ending, but I disregarded his pleas. Occasionally, I run into my spouse at work, but I choose to ignore him, and my boss, who is aware of the situation, responds accordingly. After rigorous conversation through attorneys, my spouse finally agreed to the divorce. My mother-in-law's culpability was confirmed by the police using further evidence from the pawnshop clerk's testimony. She is incarcerated for 3 years at the moment. At first, she was only trying to bother me, but when she found out that the watch might fetch a surprisingly high price at the pawnshop, she became enthusiastic and wasted the money. She thus lost her part-time job and will probably have trouble finding work after she is released from prison. Her life was finally destroyed by a serious crime that began as very petty harassment. Her behaviors are so very stupid. Moreover, the almost $20,000 required to pay the pawn store back for the watch was eventually billed to my ex-husband because she lacked substantial resources. His everyday life is being painfully examined as a result of the circumstances of our divorce and his mother's behavior spreading at work, where he is now working hard to acquire money for her living needs. In the meantime, I am enjoying my independent life to the fullest and am no longer under the stress of my ex-husband and his mother. Being able to preserve the priceless watch that was passed down from my cherished grandfather has been a huge comfort to me, even though my married life cannot be considered a success. I plan to enjoy my single life and am now putting more of an emphasis on my personal time than romantic interactions. Finding new interests is something else I'm interested in. I am about to embark on a new chapter in my life. After overcoming previous setbacks, I'm now determined to value who I am and live life to the fullest. I intend to live an active and optimistic life and to fill the days ahead with joy and optimism.
Brenda Sanders is my name. For the first time in 15 years, I was reunited with someone who had been under suspicion when I was 26 years old and a young prosecutor. My stepfather was Mario Johnson, a rich guy who was the spouse of my mother Leslie, who had remarried. Although he had a lot of land and property and was wealthy, there were allegations that he was avoiding taxes. Over the last few years, the tax office had conducted multiple investigations against him, but they had not been able to uncover any proof. They finally produced findings that resulted in a prosecution after a protracted inquiry. By chance, I ended myself taking control of this case. Having my stepfather as my first prosecution case evokes an inexplicable emotion. I ran into my stepfather in the courthouse corridor on the day of the trial. He instantly struck me as my stepfather, whom I hadn't seen in 15 years. Even now, he appeared slightly older and thinner, his piercing eyes and intimidating aura remained the same. In fact, it appeared that his weight reduction had made his eyes much more stern. I instantly cried out to my stepfather, who was going to walk past without noticing me, "Long time no see, it's me, Brenda. You took great care of us when my mother was well." When my stepfather turned around in response to my abrupt call, he first didn't seem to know me, but after hearing my name, he did. "Brenda, the kid who used to boss other kids around without properly finishing school. What are you doing here? Are you going into prison or something?" He giggled as he left. About 2 years after the death of my biological father, I met my stepfather for the first time. I went to an amusement park with my mother while I was in lower elementary school. At the door, my stepfather was standing by. The three of us played in the amusement park after my mother introduced us. But sometimes I was afraid and couldn't appreciate the moment because of my stepfather's icy stare. But it was evident that my mother was having fun, and I was thrilled to see her smiling after a long time. As we were departing, I slept out on my stepfather's back. Later on, he began to join us out more often and to come to our house for dinners. On the surface, it could have appeared that everything was going smoothly, but I couldn't accept my stepfather's complaints while my mother wasn't around. Even though he was courteous to me in front of my stepfather would constantly say this when she wasn't present: "I'm under no obligation to take care of you. I want to be with your mother. You are a nuisance." He was a haughty guy who had a tendency to despise others. According to what I've heard, his ex-wife fled from him. The house was constantly a mess, and he was unable to cook or perform other household tasks. When a friend of his noticed this, he presented my mother as a housekeeper, which is how they became acquainted. My stepfather was first captivated by my mother when she first met him and quickly suggested a romantic engagement. But since I was there, it was turned down. My stepfather said it was not an issue and kept asking to stay in touch after my mother disclosed that she had a kid from her late spouse and planned to stop the relationship. They began dating when my mother finally gave in to my stepfather's repeated attempts. My stepfather, however, hated me, and I frequently rebelled against him, which led to issues in school. My mother thought she was disturbing my stepfather every time I created problems, so she was hesitant to marry him. However, he persuaded her that marrying him would calm me down, and a year after they began dating, they were married. While my mother adopted my stepfather's last name, my surname remained my mother's maiden name following the marriage. My stepfather didn't think about this since he believed that altering the last name may cause bullying at school. We moved into a new home that was quite roomy and clearly belonged to an affluent family. My mother used to work as a maid, so the home was always tidy, and the living room was adorned with pricey vases. My mother brought me to my new room on the second story and gave me a tour of the new house. There was a new bed and study desk in the room, and I was so excited that I leaped onto the bed first, then my mother. Although I was glad to get a new room, living with my stepfather made me feel much more heartbroken and made me progressively more erratic. Living in that place never made me feel at ease. As my attendance at school decreased over time, the school phoned my mother and suggested that I be transferred to a different school. My stepfather became even more aloof when he saw my mother in anguish, and my mother appeared to be suffering between us as he saw how much I hated him. My stepfather thought that my bad academic record was damaging his reputation, which led to a serious breakdown in our relationship. He had married my mother in spite of the disapproval of his family and relatives. My mother was always composed in the face of such behavior and apologized, saying, "Please don't say that. She's very shy and needs time to open up." That's why I was hesitant about getting married. I'm really sorry for putting both of you through this. My stepfather would occasionally talk to me when he was feeling good, but when I ignored him, he couldn't hide his annoyance and said, "I'm trying to talk to you, and this is the attitude you give me." I began to avoid him by staying in my room whenever he was home when this interaction kept happening. My stepfather had never voiced any complaints about me to my mother before to our marriage, but as soon as we moved in together, his attitude entirely changed, and I believe my mother was perplexed by his change. After getting married, she had envisioned the three of us eating meals together in harmony, but the truth was very different. Taking into account my feelings, my mother would bring food to my room because I refused to eat with them. But she would also say, "Brenda, I'm sorry I've caused you pain by remarrying. But you know it was tough for me to support us on my own income. Your dad isn't really a bad person. I wish you could understand that. My mother may have anticipated this circumstance, even though she comforted me in this manner. She most likely hesitant to be married again for that reason. 3 years after I remarried my stepfather, I still feel that way. My mother became unwell in the summer. I was in the 6th grade of elementary school at the time. Despite receiving a grave prognosis, when her sickness was found, she chose to have surgery because she thought she would recover. Brenda, I'm really sorry to worry you. If I have this surgery, I can be healthy again. Once I'm better, I'd love for the three of us to go to the amusement park again. I have to keep living until I see you become a middle school student this coming April. My mother spoke to me so resolutely before to the procedure. Following the procedure, her condition did not improve, and it was clear that her body was failing. Every time he witnessed my mother's state, my stepfather was extremely disheartened, drank alcohol to numb his pain at night, and frequently vented his inebriated annoyance on me. He would shout for me to open the door when I locked myself in my room, and if I didn't, he would smash the door to get in, scold me, and then leave once he was pleased. This went on nearly every day. My mother died without recovering from her sickness 6 months after being taken to the hospital. My mother was constantly concerned about my stepfather and me when she was in the hospital. Brenda, I hope you and your father get along. If I can't come back from the hospital, I'm worried about your future. I've asked your father to take care of you until you graduate from high school. He promised, so please listen to him and be a good girl. I lied to her to ease her anxiety because I was more worried about myself than she was. It's okay, Mom. I'm getting along fine with him, so don't worry and come back home healthy. I was playing in the schoolyard during lunch break 3 days later when my teacher and the vice principal unexpectedly arrived to break the news of my mother's passing. I was immediately unable to comprehend what had occurred when I heard the words, "Your grandfather just called, and unfortunately, your mother has passed away. Your grandparents are coming to pick you up, so get ready and wait at the school gate." Only the bit about getting ready registered right away, so I returned to the classroom and began gathering my belongings. While I was packing, I kept hearing the vice principal's words, "Mom has died. Mom is dead." My friends, who were concerned, conversed with me throughout this time. "Brenda, what's wrong? Why are you leaving suddenly?" "My mom, she's passed away." "Wait, your mom passed away? With no dad around? What are you going to do now?" "I don't know, but my grandparents are coming to pick me up, so I have to wait at the school gate." After saying those things, I walked out of the classroom and toward the school gate. My grandparents came to get me about 20 minutes later, and we drove to the hospital in my grandfather's automobile, which was completely silent and devoid of any conversation. I observed my stepfather sobbing while clutching my mother's icy hand as we entered her hospital room. He brushed away his tears and walked out of the room when he saw us. I went to my mother, who appeared to be simply sleeping soundly, at my grandfather's insistence. I screamed out to her and shook her body in the hopes that she would respond, but she didn't. Mom, wake up, please. Mom, I'll do anything you say. I'll help with the chores, anything. Please wake up, Mom."
My grandma fell down in tears after hearing my sincere request, and my grandfather helped her up gently. After some time, a nurse entered the room to meticulously clean my mother's body and began cleaning the space, which abruptly made everything bustling. Staff from the funeral home arrived in the interim and started getting ready to move my mother. The corpse of my mother was carried to the funeral parlor after being lifted onto a stretcher and placed inside a funeral home truck that was waiting outside. Along with my grandparents, I got into the car and drove to the funeral parlor in the funeral home's vehicle. My mother's funeral was already being planned when I arrived. When we moved there, my mother was put in the waiting room when my grandfather inquired where it was. The funeral home employees were in the room with my stepfather as well. I stood at my mother's side and sat next to her after the meeting, but my stepfather softly pulled me away. He must have had a great love for her. I had never seen him stare at her face with such grief. My mother's face nearly seemed to grin when she was meticulously cleaned and makeup appeared, looking as lovely as she did when she was living. I didn't have time to consider my own future at the funeral. In the middle of the chaos following her passing, I sat in the family area and kept bowing to the visiting mourners, just as I had seen them do. My stepfather announced a dissownment in front of the assembled family members after the funeral was successfully over and the caskets were brought home. My stepfather icily went on, "Brenda, you and I are nothing to each other as of today. You are free to go wherever you like. I married your mother, but I never considered you as my daughter. That's why I never made any legal arrangements, nor do I intend to leave you any inheritance. Your mother is gone. There is no reason to keep you here, so get out now." My stepfather then proceeded to my room and tossed my textbooks, backpack, and clothes out the second-story window. While my stepfather's relatives laughed derisively, my maternal relatives were outraged by this. My grandparents silently collected the strewn-about possessions, took my hand, and escorted me to the vehicle that would transport me to my mother's parents' house while I stood in a state of disbelief. While we were riding, my grandparents said, "Brenda, from now on, we, your grandparents, will support you firmly, so you don't need to worry. Just going to school is enough. Let's start preparing for your transfer tomorrow. It's been tough recently, but you've done well. Take a rest tomorrow and relax." After saying these things, I ate supper early and fell asleep right away when I got to my mother's parents' house. My grandparents were busy the following day getting ready for my transfer, and my mother's parents lived far from the school district I had previously attended. My former classmates threw a farewell party for me on the final day before the transfer. My transfer may have come as a shock because I had made a lot of trouble at school, but maybe my instructor was relieved. Despite their laughter, my classmates' remarks during the farewell party seemed to convey their melancholy. I wasn't really attached to this school or my friends, despite my internal annoyance. I was able to get my late mother's possessions when I visited my stepfather's home following the goodbye party. My dad had been requested by my grandparents to get this, and I was relieved to have my mother around. I then transferred to a different primary school, but because I'm a timid person, I first found it difficult to get along with my peers and occasionally got into arguments and created trouble. My grandpa was asked to talk about my discipline, which was reportedly rather severe since the school was worried. In spite of this, my grandparents reared me with the highest affection and never reprimanded me. Their manner touched me, and I slowly started to become quite interested in my studies. Exam results were released when I started middle school, which heightened my competitive nature and motivated me to work even harder in my studies. I was constantly in the top few in my class by the third year of middle school. In front of my mother's photo, my grandparents cried with delight at my metamorphosis. Even if I wanted, I could show my mother this change. I sensed that she was pleased with my development as well. My friends respected me since I too nearly quit getting into trouble and couldn't stand to see other pupils get tormented. My feeling of justice gradually grew, and I started to have hazy hopes for the future. My new aim was to become a prosecutor, which I learned about from my homeroom teacher during career counseling in my third year of middle school. I was attracted to the sound of the profession, even though I did not completely comprehend the nuances of a prosecutor's work at the time. According to my teacher, it is typical to attend a university with a law school in order to become a prosecutor. After that, one must go to law school in order to take the bar test. I made the decision to target a high advancement high school. I was able to enroll in the high school I had my eye on thanks to my grandparents' help. I had a purpose, had a busy high school life, and time passed swiftly. I mentioned that I wanted to enroll in a certain private institution in New York when the entrance tests for universities drew near. However, I mentioned in a three-way interview that I thought about boarding since it was challenging to go to a private institution in New York while living with my grandparents. However, my grandpa informed me that using their pension to pay for both housing and education would be difficult. If I worked even a little, I wouldn't have enough money. I thus made the decision to attend a university that I could drive to from my house. After doing some research, I discovered that students who placed in the top 10 at a local institution were eligible for a tuition waiver. I thus put a lot of effort into my studies for the university admission examinations, which I passed. As a consequence, the university was able to waive my tuition, which freed my grandparents from having to pay for my education. The 4 years of university went by quickly because of the hectic schedule of lectures and part-time work. It was difficult to keep up strong scores, but the sense of accomplishment boosted my confidence. I was much more motivated after witnessing my grandparents' satisfaction with my efforts. Then, after moving on to graduate school, I met a buddy who unintentionally told me some nasty gossip about my stepfather. It occurred as soon as I boarded the train to go to college. I hurried onto the train just before the doors closed, and, as I was inhaling, I saw that I was looking up at a person my own age. I thought I recognized his face from someplace, and when I remembered, I recognized him as an elementary school friend. It was the same buddy who had chatted with me just as I was leaving after learning of my mother's passing. I said to him right away, "My name is Brenda Sanders. We went to primary school together. Remember?" "Ah, Brenda, the one who moved away in 6th grade when your mom passed away," my buddy said in shock. "Your look has improved significantly. Now, what are you doing? Are you still a student?" "Yes, I'm attending a local graduate school, studying law to become a prosecutor." "That's unexpected. In fact, I attend the same graduate school. How coincidental." "Oh, and it appears that a lot has occurred to your father while you moved out." After that, he informed me what happened after my stepfather and I split up. He was well aware of my stepfather's current predicament because his home was close to his. He claims that my stepfather moved in with another lady not long after I collected my late mother's possessions. She looked flamboyant, was much younger, and there were whispers around town that she was vying for my stepfather's fortune. Unaware of her poor reputation in the neighborhood, my stepfather was introducing his new young bride to everyone with pride. On the surface, they seemed to be leading a happy married life. But one day my stepfather was taken to the hospital after being fed a dinner that could have been poisoned. Thankfully, there was no threat to his life, and he was allowed to leave the hospital shortly after. My stepfather reported his wife to the authorities following the event, and he hasn't developed close relationships with anybody since. After the event, he secluded himself by separating from others and refusing to give anybody access to his property. My stepfather had previously been the subject of tax evasion allegations, but the incident stoked them again, and the tax bureau paid him a visit. My grandparents were also aware of my stepfather's negative reputation when I brought this up to them. "Your mother had seen his tax avoidance, Brenda, but we didn't want to inform you. Perhaps it was better that you broke up your relationship with that man since she appeared to be upset about money. Even yet, he hasn't been apprehended for tax evasion. He was constantly aware of the arrival of the tax agency. He was able to get away without having his books confiscated because of this. He has good attorneys and is careful. It may be challenging to apprehend him." I pondered if I would ever have to go to court with my stepfather as a prosecutor. I had mixed feelings regarding my connection with my stepfather at the time. I really hoped he was captured before I became a prosecutor. In the blink of an eye, graduate school was over. It was the most concentrated study session I had ever had, and the bar test pass rate was between 30% to 35% every year. I realized it would be hard to pass without such effort. It's true that getting help from my grandparents was essential to my bar test preparation. At one point, I couldn't decide whether to keep working while studying or quit my job to concentrate on my exam preparation. I mustered up the nerve to talk to my grandparents about my predicament because I was afraid that if I quit my work, I wouldn't be able to support them. Grandpa and Grandma, I need to talk about something. It's difficult for me to keep up with work since I'm studying for the bar exam. But if I resign, I won't have enough money for living costs. What should I do, in your opinion? With a kind grin, my grandma responded to this query by saying, "Don't worry. You have been providing us with living costs, which we have been saving." She then showed me the balance after removing a passbook from the drawer. "Please concentrate on your coursework. Money is not a concern for you, Grandpa, and I appreciate your constant independence. But we had thought you would depend on us more. Just focus on your exam and don't worry." After my anxiousness subsided, I threw myself into studying for the bar test, making it a habit to stay up late. I passed the bar test the first time around because of my grandmother's unwavering support and the midnight munchies she made for me. My first case as a prosecutor's office employee after graduation was the tax evasion case of my stepfather, Mario Johnson. The tax agency had made several attempts to prosecute my stepfather, but he had escaped. Despite my uneasiness, I carefully went over his ledgers and issued indictments, concluding that the material at hand made prosecution challenging. Recalling that my mother was aware of the tax cheating, I looked into alternative avenues for potential prosecution. I chose to see his ex-wife, who was incarcerated, because I thought he had poisoned her. Following the conference, conclusive evidence was obtained, which paved the way for prosecution. I'm looking into Mario's case of tax evasion. Tell me if you know anything, please. First, are you aware that he was committing tax evasion? Yes, he freely shares information with those he can trust. He knows exactly where to conceal his ledgers and how to work with them. Really? If it's feasible, could you give me those details? By proceeding with a plea bargain, there is a possibility to reduce your sentence. I get it. Then I'll assist as well. I returned to the prosecutor's office and conducted a thorough corroborative inquiry after the ex-wife provided an honest explanation of the circumstances. I requested the ex-wife to testify in court on my stepfather's tax avoidance strategies, and she readily consented. Upon acquiring substantial proof of the tax evasion, I called my stepfather to appear in court. I spoke to my stepfather as I walked by him in the courthouse corridor on the day of the trial. "Brenda, the kid who used to boss other kids around without properly finishing school," he said, just as he had done 15 years prior. "Why are you here? Do you have any plans to go to prison?" He started to walk away laughing, but I stopped him. "And," he replied, "this is the office of the prosecutor. The one going behind bars is you." My stepfather's expression altered abruptly as he heard this. "Are you now a prosecutor? The United States is done. How someone who barely completed elementary school can become a prosecutor is astounding. Did you not anticipate that you would be bringing charges against me? Numerous people have tried and failed. Considering all the difficulty I've caused you when you were younger, I don't think you have a chance." As he made his way to the courtroom, he laughed and remarked, "Remember that during the trial." After returning to the office to collect some paperwork, I calmly made my way into the courtroom. My stepfather grinned and started talking when he spotted me in court. "Well, if my daughter isn't involved, is it truly your opinion to judge me?" There were whispers of astonishment in the courtroom as a result of his remarks. I quietly replied, unfazed by his provocation, "That was 15 years ago. We are also not family because I was never legally adopted. Lawbreakers must be punished, even if you were my biological father. I became a prosecutor for that reason." After hearing my answer, the court advised us not to discuss personal matters. The mood was tense as my stepfather's laughing reverberated throughout the courtroom. As I read the indictment, my stepfather's lawyer began the defense, and the trial officially began. Prior non-prosecution rulings had been influenced by this lawyer's competence, which was well known for its quality. My stepfather appeared to anticipate a non-prosecution this time, as well after seeing the accusations I filed. As he talked to his lawyer, he appeared at ease. "Your Honor, There is insufficient evidence to support the allegations made. There would be no use in continuing. Is it possible for us to close the court in the near future? My stepfather said with assurance. I provided conclusive evidence in response to the judge's question about if there was any further evidence. Your Honor, I have called a witness who is knowledgeable with Mr. Johnson's tax evasion strategies. Could I ask her to testify in court? The courtroom was agitated by this request, and my stepfather and his lawyer were unable to conceal their commotion. Granted, please call the witness. I called the outside witness into the courtroom with the lawyer's consent. My stepfather's face grew pale when he recognized his ex-wife as the courthouse door opened and everyone turned to look at her. What brings her here? I've been hurt by this woman before, Your Honor. Please don't trust anything she says. The court ordered him to be silent after observing his distress. Please don't speak, Mr. Johnson. The witness's statement will be taken into consideration. I protest. She has a criminal history. Should we trust anything a prisoner says? The prosecution has too much bias. The lawyer was obviously uneasy by the witness's sudden entrance. Before the witness could testify, the court made them state their name and take an oath to speak honestly. In order to exert pressure on my stepfather, I included pertinent supporting documentation with the witness's story. Following the conclusion of the hearing, the judge adjourned the session for the day and stated that the decision will be rendered within a week. Mario complained to his attorney as he exited the courtroom after realizing that the circumstances were not favorable to him. I let out a breath of relief as he departed, and I was taken aback by how calm I had been. I felt a feeling of success after receiving accolades from my coworkers. In the hopes that the accusations would be upheld, I anxiously awaited the final ruling. When the court rendered the decision a week later, Mario received a real jail term. So ended the protracted conflict between Mario Johnson and the tax department. Mario harshly chastised me because he was unable to accept the judgment. This is how you pay me back for taking care of you. You betray compassion in return. I plan to file an appeal. Be ready. Security swiftly stepped in and pulled him out of the courthouse as he approached, yelling. Mario arrived at the prosecutor's office and was taken to a penitentiary facility when his appeal was denied 2 weeks later. He appeared more thinner and worse when I saw him in the prosecutor's office. I turned to him for a moment and walked away courteously. Mario then gave up all of his assets, paid the extra taxes as bail, and vanished from his home, making him untraceable. In the meantime, I became a well-known newbie at the prosecutor's office after successfully prosecuting Mario, who had never been found guilty before. My lifelong boyfriend, whom I later married, gladly agreed to live with my grandparents. He is a typical office worker with a kind disposition. He had no trouble living with my grandparents, and he was much more concerned about their everyday lives and health than I was. I discovered I was pregnant a year after we were married, but the gender of the unborn child has not yet been determined. We intend to name her after my mother, Leslie, as she is a girl. My grandparents were thrilled when I informed them. My grandparents adore my spouse and can't wait for our child to be born. Without the help of my grandparents, I don't know what I would have done after losing my parents when I was a little child and growing up unaware of their affection. Maybe I didn't know how to be affectionate growing up. But with the tender care of my grandparents, I was able to turn my life around and become a prosecutor. I am where I am now because my grandparents took me in. Unexpectedly, my life took a turn for the better after my stepfather abandoned me. No matter what sort of kid is born, I want to provide them the same level of love that my grandparents showed me because I don't want them to feel alone. I thought back on everything from my early years to the present as my pregnancy went on. It was a girl, and I delivered delivery without incident. This news made my grandparents extremely pleased and my spouse very happy, which made me feel quite content. I'm taking a break from work right now, but I intend to balance job and parenthood in the future.